So hello everyone and welcome to our Chapel in New York webinar, Understanding Tax and Legal Benefits for Fundraising in APAC. In our previous webinars, we talked about Europe, the United States and Canada. Today it is the Asia Pacific region. In Asia Pacific, there is Asia, and Asia includes about 50 countries in the world, including 3 of the world's largest economies: China, Japan, and India. Today, our 3 speakers will talk about China and Australia, of course, but also about India and many other countries. My name is Arnaud Marcilassi. I'm head of international fundraising at Chapel in New York. Our speakers are based in the United Kingdom, Hong Kong, and New Zealand. We'll start with Nancy Bixson, our managing director in London today. Nancy, can you introduce yourself? Nancy? We can't hear you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for those that we don't know, and thank you very much for those who we do know, which is fantastic to see you all. We're going to try to talk mostly about the tax and legal bits today. I'm a lawyer. I am also run Chapel in New York, and we will hopefully give you some really good information that will take you forwards in helping you with your fundraising in the region.
Thank you, Nancy. In Hong Kong, we have Edward Wong, our executive director, Chapel in New York Hong Kong Foundation. Edward, can you introduce yourself?
Sure, yes. Hello, everybody. This is Edward. As mentioned, I'm based in Hong Kong. I'm the executive director here. I have been in the fundraising and NGO management industry for more than 20 years. And besides of working for Chapel in New York, I also have a part-time lectureship to teach the same thing at university level.
Thank you, Edward. In Auckland, New Zealand, we have John Godfrey, our regional lead, Australia, New Zealand, and Asia Pacific. John, can you introduce yourself?
Kia ora, everybody from New Zealand. Great to be here. Great to talk with you all. I have had a fundraising career that's taken me from Australia to the UK, back to Australia, back to New Zealand, and in the course of that, I've worked in various parts of Asia. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of that experience and helping present you with a broad view of the possibilities of engaging with and raising funds from the Asia and the Asia Pacific.
Thank you, John. So let's start. But before we begin, just a few words about Chapel in New York for those of you who don't know us yet. We've been around in the world for 25 years. We helped raise $1 billion in these 25 years. We have over 450 clients. We have a unique team of 37 fundraising experts all over the world, including fabulous people like John today. We have 6 umbrella foundations to help you raise funds abroad. One in US, one in Canada, one in the UK, one in the Netherlands, and soon in France and Spain, one in Switzerland, and one in Hong Kong. We will start during the webinar. If you have questions, you can ask questions in the chat. And we will start right away with Edward. Edward?
Yes, I'm here. Okay, let's start. Okay, as the title suggests, this webinar will talk about the tax and legal things. So I will divide my sharing in these 2 parts. First, I will go to talk about the tax benefit things, because always this is the first thing our members or potential member ask. Okay, if my donor donate in Hong Kong, what kind of tax benefit they may eligible? So it's very straightforward and simple. In Hong Kong, all of the qualified eligible donation can enjoy 100% tax incentive, up to a maximum of 35% of the annual taxable income or the taxable profit of the previous tax reporting period. Just that simple. It's easy to calculate. So you can tell your donors, you can tell your prospect that they can, if they donate in Hong Kong, they can enjoy the tax benefit right away. Okay. And the other thing related to tax is, okay, if eventually for whatever reason you prefer to set up your own charitable entity in Hong Kong, basically the overall regulation haven't changed. What was changed recently is that you have to fill a lot more forms. The tax authority revised the forms, so you have to fill in a lot more things, a lot more time-consuming form filling. But basically, all the rest of the procedure, everything will be the same. So this is the part of the tax thing in Hong Kong. Okay, then let's go to the legal things, because the legal environment changed quite dramatically, not necessarily related to fundraising, but the overall political landscape in Hong Kong changed recently, as you might know, some of you might know. And also I received quite a number of inquiries from our members. Okay, they asked me, hey, Edward, I'm going to visit Hong Kong next month, and I'm going to organize an alumni fundraising event or something like that. Can we still do that in Hong Kong? It is still allowed, it is still legal. Yes, in short, I can tell you, basically, there's nothing changed. Basically, up to this moment, you still can do whatever you have been doing before COVID. Okay, if you come to Hong Kong to organize a private event to entertain your alumni as a way to cultivate them, as a way to facilitate the donation, fine, you can still do it. Okay, what you have to pay attention to in the near future is, first, our government have talked quite actively these days or these months that they are thinking about having new regulation to govern crowdfundings. Okay, I don't have the key idea how the regulation will look like, but I'm pretty sure it will be there maybe within the coming few months or coming 12 months. So we have to pay attention to this. Okay. The second thing is, okay, for other public fundraising activities. Okay. It's still not yet there, but again, the same. Some of the lawmaker voiced the concern that we should regulate public fundraising event. Okay, in addition to crowdfunding, it means all kind of public fundraising besides of crowdfunding. But this is at the very initial stage. Okay, there's not much discussion now, but because of the change of the political environment in Hong Kong, I might anticipate there might be some new rules in maybe the coming in place in the coming few years. So this is something, but it's still on a pretty long shot thing, not instantly. So for us, okay, if you are a university, education institution, you are not going to do a public fundraising, but you organize private event just for your alumni or parents. Nothing changed by this time. You still can do whatever you have been doing over the last many years. And another thing is not about the fundraising regulation. It's about our government's intention to set up Hong Kong as a hub of family office. We take clear that we have the intention to build ourselves as the Asian Pacific family office hub. The government is drawing up the regulation or some policy in trying to recruit the wealthy people or foundation to set up the office in Hong Kong. But honestly, both Singapore, Vietnam government are also talking about the same thing. So there's some competition here in this part of the world. But no matter what, we will see many more family office set up in Hong Kong. And for sure, we understand part of their job, part of their task is to donate. Okay, besides of their own wealth sustainability, some of these family office will donate, are interested in donate some of their money. So for us from overseas, it might be something interesting to you that you might have some family office that you might want to cultivate in the coming future. So this is the very basic landscape in Hong Kong in terms of the legal or political environment. Okay, I see some
there are
questions.
some questions.
Should I answer it now or at the end of the whole section?
Yeah, go ahead, Edward. You see the questions or you want me to read them?
Okay, let me, I see it. Okay, let me scroll down. Okay, it's fundraising from your alumni in a public event. No, if you are, for example, if you organize it at a hotel ballroom, okay, you only send out invitation to your alum or their family or their parents. That is a private event. Okay, up to now, this is still a private event. Nothing changed. But as I said, because we anticipate some new regulation in the coming few years, I don't know what will happen 3 years from now or 5 years from now. So we have to pay attention. We have to pay a close attention to what is coming. But for now, for the coming short period of time, say the coming three years maybe, your alumni event will be okay. Okay, nothing changed. No need to worry. Okay, how different are mainland China rules and tax benefit and mainland China, okay.
To Hong Kong.
Okay, the mainland Chinese rules and tax regulation keep changing from time to time, from province to province. But one of the key thing is you have to pay very much attention because of a few reasons. First, of course, they have a very tight restriction of how much money people can transfer outside of the country. So if you are an overseas charity or overseas university or other institutions, you have to think about how you can get the money from your Chinese-based donor, because they are not allowed to transfer a huge amount of money out of the country in one go. And also, when you do due diligence, you have to pay attention, or it is much better if you can find someone who have the expertise, who have the connection in China to do the due diligence, rather than rely on yourself to do the due diligence, because for sure we will touch upon some very sensitive information, okay? And I don't want any of us to get into any trouble, okay? So it would be much better if you can find an in-country consulting firm to help you to do the due diligence. They know what is sensitive, what kind of information we better leave it alone, what kind of information is safe for you to do your assessment. Okay, and then question, crowdfunding can mean a range of things. How can you use it can mean a range of things. How can you using it? Okay, crowdfunding. Okay, in Hong Kong, back to the Hong Kong, the local case, because okay, I hate to say it, but I have to admit it, because of what happened in Hong Kong in 2019, because of the social unrest. Some organization or some people use crowdfunding as a platform to fund their social movement. And therefore, that's why this is the only reason why our government try to control, try to regulate it. So again, if for now, because the regulation is not yet here, okay, I don't know how it would be written at the end of the day. But based on what we understand, what we know by this time, okay, if we can prove that if we do crowd fundraising for example, to benefit students by providing scholarship, okay, to crowdfund, to raise money to set up a research facility in our university or something like that, it would be okay. It should, I say it should be okay for now, okay. But again, we will keep a close eye on the new development in this regard. So if you have any interest in this part of the world to do crowd fundraising in this part of the world, okay, stay close to us, okay. I will update you with the new legal development in related to crowdfunding. So can I answer all your questions?
Yeah, that's all. That's all for now. Thank you so much,
Mhm.
Edward. We'll now go to John in New Zealand. John.
You could go to me, but you could also go to Nancy because she was going to talk about Singapore.
Oh, you want to talk about Singapore first, Nancy?
I'm happy to do so because it's a different situation. Hello, everyone, and thank you again for being with us. Unlike Hong Kong, which obviously allows donations which go outside Hong Kong, even though it's limited to education, poverty, religion, and benefiting the Hong Kong community. I mean, education obviously encompasses a lot of things, and even benefiting the Hong Kong community does. That gives at least some scope for international stuff, donations that are tax effective. And of course, you have to give to a Hong Kong charity for that, which is why we have the Hong Kong Foundation. Singapore is different, obviously. It has a wonderful benefit, and those of you in Singapore obviously will know this, that for donations that qualify, you get 250% deduction for the donation. The problem for us outside Singapore and for organizations outside Singapore is that they have to benefit the local community, they have to benefit the Singaporean community, which really restricts what you can do with the money. You can't build a building. I mean, at your campus, or you can't, you can't. Now, having said that, there are things like health and welfare that will benefit the Singaporean community, but it's much more of a difficulty in terms of that. You can give cash in Singapore. You can give shares on the Singaporean stock market. You can give immovable property in Singapore and get a tax deduction. It's the international bit that is the real problem. There is a little bit of hope in this. Edward mentioned the competition between Hong Kong and Singapore and everyone for family offices. And in 2023, they brought in some new regulations, which still have time to mature, that a donor can get 100% tax deduction if it's made through a family office to a qualifying local intermediary, such as the community chest. So usually you get a tax deduction through any IPC, which is like a registered charity, or a Section 88 in Hong Kong. But there's this little new exception that if the money comes from through a family office to a qualifying local intermediary, such as the Singapore Community Chest, and all IPCs are not these qualifying local intermediaries, but this is all really brand new still in Singapore. The money can go internationally, and there's 100% deduction. But obviously, that's very still restrictive because it's got to come out of a family office. It's got to go to a qualifying local intermediary, but then it can, and you're not getting 250%, you're getting 100%. So there is some exceptions there. It just means that, if you're fundraising in Singapore, probably the tax issues are not going to be primary in terms of benefit. It means you're going to have a lot of competition, obviously, from Singaporean type charities that can offer 250%. It does mean that obviously, like all things, you either have to think of what you can do that would benefit the Singaporean community, such as offering scholarships to Singaporean students, for example, or whatever else you're doing that might qualify. But it's not as useful as Hong Kong, and although it is a broader society, obviously, without a lot of the Chinese restrictions that we're seeing in Hong Kong. So that's it for me, I think, on Singapore.
There's just one question from Graham. Might a donation from your alumni in Singapore supporting a bursary for a student to study at your school in the UK qualify for the 250% relief for the donor?
Yes, so that's going to benefit the Singaporean community as long as the gift is to a IPC. Then you probably are going to be, or that's probably going to qualify. But it can't. But the money can't come straight to you. So
Okay.
the question about doesn't allow cross-border fundraising. Well, I mean, it does to the extent that you can fundraise in Singapore. It's just a question of whether there's no issue about that. It's a question of whether there's a tax deduction for money coming outside, with the exception of this new family office incentive to try to get the family office there.
All
Okay.
right. Thank you, Nancy. So now we move to John.
Yes, thank you, Arno. My part of this webinar, I'm going to try and cover not all of the rest of Asia, but much of the rest of Asia. So Australia, New Zealand, and India are countries that I've had experience of fundraising and philanthropy. But I'm also going to try and talk to some other Asian countries where some of you may have alumni, patrons, supporters, or donors. So Nancy's already talked about Singapore, and obviously Edward has talked about Hong Kong and China. I'll talk about Malaysia, the Philippines, South Korea, Taiwan, and Pakistan. But I'd like to make some observations just really to add to what Edward has explained about China, and also what I've learned from working in India, because there are some commonalities. First of all, what both countries have in common, there is a relatively large and growing wealthy upper middle class. And many of those have had experience of, either by being graduates of Western, particularly English-speaking Western educational institutions, or they have family members. They're sending their children to school and universities overseas. So bear that in mind. Now you'll hear the occasional media story of some massive gifts from ultra high net worths in both India and China. Those certainly exist, but what you don't hear so much about, because it's not so headline grabbing, is that there is in fact quite a lot of generous giving to, and again, particularly to school and education, school and educational institutes from China and from India. And that's because both cultures value education. Education is seen as something very important, and they have an ethos of giving back or paying forward. So they will give to education, partly because they're grateful of the opportunities given them or their families, but they also will give to education or kind of any research if they see that that is actually going to benefit their own country. So in general, I would say with a lot of Asian countries, the ethos of the philosophy is giving back, but it's also about, and we've already touched upon the fact that a lot of countries do not encourage giving outside. But if you're giving to something inside, even if you're giving it to an external, a cross-border institution, but the benefits, the research, for example, or the education or the scholarships and so on are going to be benefiting the country where the donor is getting a tax deduction, that will succeed. That will more likely succeed. One of the best authorities on giving in India and China is a person called Mark Siddell, who used to work for the Ford Foundation in both those countries and now an academic. And I happened to see a webinar that he gave for the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. And he pointed out there's some very strong similarities between India and China. Both India and China, as has been touched on already, make it extremely difficult for people to transfer money out of those countries. So that doesn't mean you won't or can't. We've already talked about some of those very public, high-profile gifts by ultra high net worth people like the Tatas, like the Mahindras, like Alibaba, like his name escapes me at the moment, but the founder of Alibaba in China, who's given very generously to universities both in Australia and the UK, and so on. But most of those people and a lot of the other more wealthy upper middle class are usually able to give because they have entities outside of China and India. So they have business entities or they have residency in other countries. So what usually happens is that they bypass the bureaucracy that's involved in giving from India or China by giving from some other country, whether it be Singapore, whether it be Hong Kong, or whether indeed it be the US or the UK. You know, those people have that flexibility. Sometimes it's a corporate gift because in Asia, family-owned businesses are quite common. Businesses are not necessarily owned by shareholders, they're owned by families, which gives the owners the facility to give through their corporations. The other thing that both India and China and other countries that I'll be talking about in my 5 or 10 minutes is that they make it very difficult for people or for charities in their countries to receive money from overseas. In India, they have something called the FCRA, the Foreign Charity Regulatory Foreign Contributions Regulation Act, which is the Indian government's tool for preventing funding being received from overseas for causes that they regard as unacceptable. And that's been used against organizations such as Greenpeace, such as Amnesty, such as ActionAid. Quite a strong politically motivated restriction on giving to organizations in India that are seen as activists and against the policies of the Indian government. China has its comparable NGO law, which is used as a tool in much the same way. But again, going back to this webinar that I was hearing Mark giving his very informed and very authoritative view, there are, and Edward indicated the importance of tapping into this. There are professionals, there are lawyers and accountants in both countries who are knowledgeable, who do know how to work their way through the law. Mark described them as pushing back against those onerous legislations, and they will work with you. They will work with clients and help navigate those obstacles. In particular, I know someone in India who's very good at that. If anyone is thinking of setting up a fundraising and setting up a charity in India, here's someone I can refer to you. And it will be much easier for those of you, those countries those of you who are setting up or already have campuses in India, in China. You will still have to go through some hoops to set yourselves up to be eligible as charities to give tax deductions. But the fact that it's about education or the fact that it's about research means that you're unlikely to fall foul of the government. You're unlikely to be seen as activist or doing something that's kind of interfering with what the government wants to do in those countries. Education is, as I said, highly valued, and providing you obviously are very careful about what you're doing, as long as you don't stray into delicate political areas. If you have an institution, a campus, or a franchise in India or China, you would very likely be able to get charitable registration in those countries, despite all the regulations. Now turning to Australia and New Zealand, again, the news is not that great, because both countries have been traditionally and still are somewhat reluctant to incentivize cross-border giving. Both countries have a strong culture of giving. In country, there are tax benefits for giving to education, culture, and all the other things like health, culture, religion, relief of poverty, and so on that you'll be familiar with from any country that has their charity laws based on the English Elizabethan charitable principles. But unlike some of those countries where Chapel in York has set up foundations like the US, like the UK, like Hong Kong and Canada, giving a tax benefit for gifts where the beneficiaries are overseas is very difficult. There are some charities who are recognized by the government, but they have to be specifically recognized and gazetted by the government to be able to issue tax receipts. So the larger charities like Amnesty International, Oxfam World Vision, and so on, yes, they are able to raise money in Australia and New Zealand and provide tax receipts, even though the beneficiaries are overseas, but the majority aren't. There are slightly different regulations in country. So Australia has what they call a DGR, or a deductible gift recipient status, which isn't available to all charities. And there are charities that are exempt from income tax and GST and the like, but are not DGRs. And there's a class of DGR which is known as a PBI. There's a lot of acronyms in charity law in Australia. Public benevolent institutions, which are now beginning to provide benefits overseas and are able to provide tax deductibility on those benefits. But the focus of those is on the relief of poverty and healthcare and education to the disadvantaged. So not really in the position to offer tax deductibility to schools, universities, or even medical research, and certainly not arts and cultural organizations. There are family foundations, and there is a class of organization called a PAF with a P, which is a private ancillary fund, which is effectively the Australian equivalent of a DAF with a D. And that there is some propensity and some indication that they can give to international activities. The recent taxation office data showed that they were giving about 7% of their proceeds to so-called international activities, but it's very difficult to discern what that actually is. But there's a little bit of wriggle room, I would say, if you're able to make your gift through a private ancillary fund. And that's pretty much the same in New Zealand, except there's only 2 DAFs that actually have been listed, that have been allowed to give overseas. And one's called the Gift Trust, and the other's called the Kaiharahi Trust. But they both work through other intermediaries. So one works through what used to be called Give to Asia, which is now called Myriad, and the other works through a Swiss-based organization called TrustBridge. And again, in both cases, the focus tends to be on the relief of poverty, healthcare for the disadvantaged, and tends to go through large INGOs like the UN Refugee Council or the World Health Organization. But the good news is there is a strong culture of philanthropy in both countries. People, you will have seen, in fact, in the Charities Aid Foundation's Global Giving Reports and others, that Australia and New Zealand tend to come up fairly highly. In the UK recently, they've been claiming that New Zealand should be a model for giving in the UK because we give something like 1.1 or 1.2% of our GDP to charities. So you can certainly have conversations with people, and there'll be people in New Zealand and Australia who've been educated overseas, who've lived overseas, and if you have your organization, has the kind of values, has the kind of commitments that they want to give back to, then it is likely that you will be able to have those sorts of conversations, and the kind of levels that you're likely to be talking with potential major gift donors. The tax incentive is less likely to be important. You're perfectly capable, if you approach major gifts in either Australia or New Zealand, to have the same of conversations and offer the sorts of opportunities that are likely to mean that you will get major gifts. Let me now just quickly go through some of the other Asian jurisdictions. I'm not, I would have to say, as familiar with them as a fundraiser. I haven't worked as a fundraiser in them, but I'll talk you through what I know about their particular tax regulations as it applies to charitable giving. So in Japan, to qualify for a tax deduction, rather like some of the other countries we've discussed, like Australia and New Zealand, it has to be to a government-approved, a government-designated charity. My own understanding and my little bit of experience of philanthropy, or at least giving from Japan, is that you're much more likely to have a fruitful partnership with a corporate entity. So corporate sponsorship or corporate partnerships are more likely to lead to success in getting funding from Japan than individual philanthropy, which even internally isn't strongly developed. Individual giving in Japan is not strongly developed. South Korea, somewhat different. It does provide tax incentives for giving to international organizations as well as domestically. Although, again, they tend to be international NGOs like the UN Refugee Agency or the World Food Programme. Also, it doesn't have geographic restrictions, so it does allow tax deductions on gifts overseas, but they have to be from charities that are registered in South Korea. But theoretically, it would be possible to register a charity in South Korea. I wouldn't claim to have or be able to offer any expert advice on that, but if you engage with professionals, accountants and lawyers, it's very likely that you would be able to set up a charitable foundation in Korea. And I suspect there are some international religious foundations that have already set themselves up to fundraise and give tax-deductible receipts in South Korea. Taiwan is equally very flexible. Gifts can be made overseas without restrictions. Again, they'll only be tax-deductible under specific circumstances with government approval. But again, it's possible to set up a charity and to provide benefits overseas. Again, you would need to take professional advice on that. I've touched on India, but moving to the rest of South Asia, there's only really a great deal of information at the moment about Pakistan, and there are international non-profit organizations there that are registered and that are able to receive taxable deductible gifts for benefits overseas. I suspect the same is probably true of Bangladesh and Sri Lanka because they share both common legal systems, and they also share with Pakistan, at least in the sort of Islamic culture of giving, which is very strongly oriented to giving and to giving back, and to philanthropy is well understood throughout South Asia, whether it be Muslim or Hindu or the various other religions that predominate there. In Southeast Asia, I can only talk fairly sketchily about the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. But once again, in the Philippines, gifts to international organizations are tax deductible. But again, they'll tend to be those large INGOs and others. The International Rice Research Institute is based in the Philippines, and I recall, and I know a number of people that have worked successfully fundraising overseas for that particular institute. And again, it's quite possible that with proper legal and accounting advice, you could set up a charity in the Philippines if you felt you had sufficient, if you had alumni, if you had supporters there, it might be possible to do that. Indonesia and Malaysia, again, both have strong traditions of giving, but there's little indication that I'm aware of that they've given the possibility of charitable registration or deductibility on gifts to overseas, to gifts that are going to go overseas or to overseas organizations. So it's a little bit of a mixture in much of Asia, but I think the general thing to recall is that if you have a strong enough connection to your alumni, if you've got a capacity to attract major gifts, it will be possible, and you should be having those conversations with people. It's not necessarily the fact that they're going to be anticipating tax deductibility on their gifts, and it's quite possible that they're able to give through from assets or through businesses that, or because they are resident in other countries. So I think, overall, Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, North Asia, and Australia and New Zealand are certainly have the potential. If you have a lot of people that you think you would be interested in supporting you, then I would encourage you to do so.
All right. Thank you, John. Nancy, I think you want to say a few more words about Singapore, and there are actually 2 questions about Singapore. We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Sorry. I'll answer the first 2 questions. There, would a fellowship or residency qualify? I mean, if it's from a Singaporean, probably. They don't actually have to stay in Singapore for it to benefit the Singaporean community. Do we have a foundation in Singapore? Before COVID, we were on process to have one. We have made a decision that's not public yet about what we're going to do, but it looks unlikely we're going to move forwards in Singapore because we can add so little value there. It's just such a narrow area that we can offer value to. So it is under consideration, but I doubt very seriously we're going to go forward with it because, again, we can't offer any very much help. We won't completely decide about that yet. But as there's other places where we can do better for people, we'd like to focus our attentions there. The other thing that I was going to mention, and I went completely past it, and John reminded me in his exposition, is that there is a new scheme in Singapore that you can get 100% tax deduction for donations for overseas humanitarian relief efforts. That's called OHAS. It's going to run 4 years as a pilot from the beginning of 2025 to the end of 2028. So, I mean, it's quite obvious that the region is very highly focused on international relief. And to be fair, that's back in 1601 with the Statute of Elizabeth, which is where philanthropy sort of started, leaving aside China. The Western view of philanthropy started. It was all about international helping people. So this is a and very deeply embedded area of philanthropy, and obviously one which is still very important in this particular region. John, the question is, yeah.
India, Pakistan, John? On India, what is the best way to encourage tax-efficient donations from Indian donors to projects in India, same in Pakistan?
Well, certainly I can answer for India in that if you are a charity registered in India, you have to apply. I haven't got the actual regulation open in front of me, but there are 2 forms of charitable registration which cover different types of charity. But there is a strongly developed culture of philanthropy. There are regulations and charitable rules which include the fact that donors can get a tax deduction on their gifts. There's a strongly developed and growing professional fundraisers in the community of professional fundraisers in India, and there's a lot of people whom you can turn to advice for, and I'd certainly be happy to steer you in their direction or give you advice myself based on my own experience of working in India. Pakistan, I can speak less about. Certainly, I've not had any experience of working in Pakistan, but I've been to various conferences of fundraisers where people from Pakistan, where people from Sri Lanka, where people from Bangladesh have been in attendance. So again, there is there is a fundraising community, therefore there is a giving community, and their rules are very likely to be based on British law. So the same sorts of charitable causes that I've mentioned previously: religion, education, health, culture, are likely to be eligible for tax deductions from the taxpayers in those countries. It's the overseas contributions that are complicated and resisted.
Thank you, John. Nancy, you want to add something? Are we finished?
Does anyone else have any questions?
No more questions.
Right. Well, I just wanted to say on behalf of Chapel New York, thank you all very much for coming. And just to, I guess, remind you of what we do have foundations around the world through which you can fundraise and offer tax benefits in those major markets. We're not everywhere, but we've tried to pick places that make sense. We also set up and manage charities. So we look after quite a number of American 501c3s, UK registered charities. We can do Section 88s in Hong Kong and in other registered charities in other places. And we have fundraising, but our focus on fundraising is cross-border. We don't really do we do not do local fundraising. Where we add value in the fundraising world is in looking at your fundraising in other countries, either from starting with the feasibility study and an action plan to actual implementation in the country. Because that's one of the hardest things we know, is that if you're fundraising in another country, you're not there. So you need to, you need somebody who can help you in country. That's where our specialty lies. And that's sort of the range of what so we specialize in international things. That's why we do these seminars on international issues, and we hope that you found them useful. We will be very delighted to invite you to other events that we have in this space, and if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. We'd be delighted to just help or give you any advice that we've got. So thank you all very much for coming. Arnaud, back to you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Thank you, everyone. I've just put my email in the chat. If you need advice on international fundraising, like Nancy just said, we can help you. We have 37 experts in the world, and we'll be delighted to help you. Get in touch with me, get in touch with us, and we'll come back to you with other webinars. We're very active. I'm flying tomorrow to CASE Latin America in Mexico. Nancy is just back from CASE Nordics. Edwards and John are going to CASE Singapore, I think. So we're everywhere. We love international, and we'd love to help you. Thank you, and see you soon.